So you've learned how to ride a unicycle, but you're sick and tired of trying to find a tree to get on every time you fall off. Well, now it's time to learn free mounting. By now, I'm sure you're able to get on if you pull yourself up on a wall or a tree or something, but free mounting is being able to get on the unicycle without any additional assistance. It's just you. In this video, I'll talk about a lot of things that other people talk about in their mounting videos, except I'm going to break it down a little bit differently. We're going to learn about stable mounts, unstable mounts, and jump mounts, which really any free mount could be categorized in one of those three categories. We'll explain the category and talk about the pros and cons, so you can try all of them or just find the one that you think is going to work best for you. But I would recommend trying all of them. The first category is probably easiest for beginners, and that's any static or stable mount. A stable mount implies that the wheel is stable when you're actually getting on the unicycle. You can do this in a number of ways. You can use a curb, or you can use the downstroke. Because a unicycle is a fixed wheel apparatus, if you put all of your weight on the pedal on the downstroke when it's completely vertical or perpendicular to the floor, the unicycle won't be able to go anywhere. This is a good opportunity for you to get on without fear of the unicycle slipping out from under you. The bad part about this is that it's really awkward to get moving. With certain stable mounts, the unicycle crank is vertical, which isn't advantageous for actually getting to ride. A little background about riding and pedal strokes. Typically when you're on the seat and on the unicycle, the only direction you can push is down. However, to make the unicycle go forward, you have to push tangential to the crank rotation. This means when the pedal is in this position, you have to push that way. When the pedal's in this position, you have to push that way. When the pedal's in this position, you have to push that way, and so on. If you know anything about vectors, typically when you're pushing down, there's still a component to that vector that is pushing tangential to the crank rotation. However, the component vector of pushing down changes depending on the crank position. If your crank is horizontal, you're in the most advantageous position for movement, and all of that vector of pushing down gets transferred to rotating the pedal. However, when you're in a vertical crank position, none of that downward force gets transferred to tangential force, because there's no component of down that gets translated to 90 degrees in a different direction. That's why stable mounts, when your crank is vertical, is hard to get going, because all of that downward pressure gets translated nowhere. That's why this crank position is called the dead zone. Ways to remedy this are actually using a curb, because if you use a curb, your crank doesn't have to be vertical. You can make it horizontal if you want to, and the wheel won't actually go anywhere. This way, when you get on, you're ready to go with that crank in a horizontal position. You can also do a kickback maneuver. With your foot on the down pedal, instead of trying to push the opposite pedal forward, you'll swing your leg around and pull it back. You'll have to lean back for this to work, but it's a little easier to pull that pedal backwards as opposed to pushing it forward with the free leg. All you really have to do is pull it a quarter crank, an eighth of a crank backwards in order for the leg that used to be on the down pedal to be in a more advantageous position to get riding. So the stable mounts are really any mount that you do that requires your wheel to actually stay fixed. The pro to this is it's easier to actually get on, and the con is it's harder to start riding. There are solutions like the kickback method or using a curb, but if you're trying to actually truly free mount without any additional assistance of curbs, the kickback method is your really only friend here. That or just try to wiggle and pedal forward as best you can. Stable mounts include regular vertical crank position, using a curb, the kickback method, also the kick up method because of that bottom foot. You can also hold the wheel with your hands while you try to mount. Also, wraparounds are stable mounts. The second classification of mounts is the unstable mount. The unstable mount is just the opposite of a stable mount. Instead of getting on with a fixed wheel that you know is not going to move, the unstable mount puts less emphasis on keeping a fixed wheel and more emphasis on being able to ride easily once you're on. Most unstable mounts start with a horizontal crank position for this reason, to be able to ride quickly and easily once you're actually on. There are a lot of different unstable mounting positions, including the phantom box mount and the rolling mount. There's probably a better name for the phantom box mount out there, but I'm just going to call them the phantom box mount because I feel like that makes sense. The phantom box mount essentially puts a little bit of weight on that back pedal, whatever pedal is closest to you. All it's trying to do is make sure that the pedals don't rotate forward. So you're just keeping that foot hovering with light pressure on that back pedal, just enough so you can get that other foot to the other pedal. The reason why I call it a phantom box mount is because it kind of looks like that trick where you pretend like there's a box in front of you and you put your foot up and then you jump over the box. That's the exact same thing. That's a good drill to do if you want to actually perform this mount. If I try to get on and my crank looks like this, one pedal being at 4 or 5 o'clock and the other pedal being at 10 or 11, I can use the mechanical disadvantage of a non-optimal crank position to actually get going. Only about half of the pressure that I put on this foot is translated making the unicycle move, which is a good thing because I don't want the unicycle to move, but I also don't want it to be in a vertical crank position. This, you get the best of both worlds. Just be wary to not go too close to vertical, because if you do that, you might actually push forward and make the unicycle go forward, and then you fall or get hurt somehow, I don't know.
You can also try putting your foot directly on the crank instead of directly on the pedal. This way the force that you do impart onto the unicycle doesn't get transferred onto the wheel, making the wheel move. This gives you more time to get your other foot up. Definitely try it out, but once you get your foot on the other pedal, you will have to move the ball of your foot away from the crank, which you either roll your ankle, which is okay, or you just kind of slither your foot off, either of which work.
The rolling mount is the phantom box mount, except you're moving forward as you do it. When you're doing it stationary, if you push down on the pedal, it immediately starts to go backwards. But if you're rolling forward and you push down, you have to allow the unicycle to decelerate moving forward and then accelerate moving backwards. Easy to start pedaling forward, it's quick to actually get on, and even though it's an unstable wheel, the wheel is pretty much locked in place if you do it right for, a second or two, and that's all you need to get on. With some practice, this is probably going to be the mount that you use the most. The pros to this is it's really easy to start moving forward. The con is it's not that intuitive to actually get on because you have a limited amount of time or the unicycle may move from under you. Examples of an unstable mount would be the phantom box mount, the rolling mount, the rollback mount, which is actually when you put all of your weight on that back pedal in a horizontal position so the unicycle truly comes towards you and you don't have to go towards it, and then you just get off on your merry way. The last category of mounts, I think, is an actual option. I've known people that have started unicycling and could only jump mount. That actually got them in the habit of, continuing every day, and then the other mounts came later. So it's considered a little bit more risky, so just be aware of that. A jump mount is essentially putting the unicycle somewhere and jumping on it. That's it. You also might want to switch what pedal's in front when you're doing your jump mount. So if your left pedal is closest to you when you're doing your unstable mounts, it might be more comfortable if you put the left pedal farther away from you when you're doing your jump mounts. It replicates what your crank position would be if you were to be actually jumping on the unicycle. So play around with it and see what feels best for you. Obviously, everything has to land at the same time. You have to land on the seat, your left and your right foot have to land on the pedals, and your feet have to be in a position where you could actually start pedaling. Sometimes your feet land on the crank and it's hard to actually start moving. It also takes a fair amount of courage to do this. If you miss one of the pedals, the unicycle might come back and give you a pedal bite in your shins or in your calf. Or if you miss the pedals altogether, you might just land right in your crotch area. Typically this isn't a problem because the unicycle will just slide out from under you, but I don't know, might be scary. The pros to this are you don't really need to spend time with technique. You just kind of jump on and go. Technique gives way to courage. The con is everything I just said. Higher risk for pedal bites, higher risk for getting areas hurt, and maybe a higher risk for falling. But there's a bonus pro. It looks super cool. And there's a lot of different novel things you can do. It actually is a really good way to prep doing unispins if you're into flatland. So those are the 3 categories of mounting. This isn't an exhaustive tutorial on each one of those. Every mount I can think of would fall under one of those 3 categories. So if you understand the categories, you can really understand any type of mount. I hope this is helpful. Let me know in the comments if it is or if it isn't. And consider subscribing if you want more unicycle content. Thanks and good luck.